Have you ever wondered why, no matter how much you love, you are never truly loved? Why the desire you feel always seems to turn you against yourself? In this video, you will discover what Nietzsche really thought about feminine love and why he said that woman does not love in the way you imagine. Get ready. What you are about to hear will shatter all your illusions about love, desire, and emotional control. If themes such as psychology, philosophy, and the darkness of the human soul interest you, subscribe to the channel now. For Nietzsche, woman was never simply an object of desire or a symbol of fragility. He saw in her something much deeper, the ability to control without force, to command without needing to impose openly. While men competed with muscles and bravado, believing that dominance was conquered through direct confrontations, woman, according to Nietzsche, operated in the invisible field, silent and at the same time more lethal, the emotional. Every smile, every gesture, every silence carries strategic weight. She did not need to shout, because her influence was already penetrating the thoughts and instincts of man before he even realized it. This was, in the philosopher's view, the essence of true feminine ability, the art of transforming affection into power. Nietzsche observed that men, often blinded by desire, confused attention with love and presence with affection. Woman, however, knows exactly how to exploit this confusion, manipulating emotions in an almost invisible way. She does not need to deceive. She simply understands what moves a man's heart, what voids he carries, and how those voids can be subtly shaped. For him, the feminine is not malicious. It is above all pure lucidity, a refined emotional intelligence that recognizes that the vulnerability of others is a powerful tool. The world delivers explicit signs of power, but woman rules silently, transforming the invisible into law. This ability to operate in the invisible makes woman a living architecture of emotional strategies. Nietzsche compares this talent to alchemy, transforming desires into submission, offerings into silent surrender, neediness into emotional obedience. Every delicate gesture, every calculated look, every planned absence is like moving pieces on a chessboard that the man does not even realize exists. Power is not in physical confrontation or an obvious command. It lies in the ability to make the other want to give in, to create a situation in which the man believes he is in control when in fact he is already being led. Nietzsche also highlights that woman acts in a social system in which being vulnerable can be transformed into an advantage. Unlike what many men believe, apparent weakness is not weakness at all. It is a silent weapon. The man who gives himself emotionally, who seeks to be desired, loved, or validated, is manipulated not out of malice but out of a natural, invisible, and relentless strategic logic. In this scenario, the feminine becomes the master of the art of keeping man in motion, chasing a promise that is never fully revealed, and this requires perception, patience, and intelligence, qualities that Nietzsche deeply respected. The philosopher also warns of the difference between what is instinct and what is control. For Nietzsche, male instinct often seeks immediate satisfaction, desire, or affection, but woman, on the contrary, operates with long-term vision, turning each interaction into an opportunity to shape behaviors and feelings. Every gesture of affection, every display of love, even if it seems casual, carries within it a calculated strategy, an influence that shapes the other almost invisibly. Feminine power, therefore, does not shout, does not demand, does not beg. It infiltrates, conquers, and transforms silently. Nietzsche did not see this as a matter of morality, but of reality. The feminine does not act out of malice, but out of a deep understanding of the emotional laws that govern man. He observed that true strength lies not in the body, nor in violence, but in the ability to generate submission through absence, mystery, and the unfulfilled promise. Man, distracted by desire, never realizes he is being led. Woman, on the other hand, knows exactly the effect of every gesture and every silence. And it is this mastery that Nietzsche considers one of the most impressive manifestations of human power. Furthermore, Nietzsche recognizes that the feminine game is not one-sided. It depends on man's surrender. Woman's power exists only as long as man remains vulnerable, as long as he seeks validation, affection, and approval outside himself. For this reason, he insists, woman does not create artificial traps. She responds to natural opportunities, exploiting the neediness that already exists. The problem is not woman, but man who allows himself to be captured by the enchantment of promise and the desire to be loved. This understanding completely deconstructs the romanticized view of love and reveals a dynamic of psychological play that few perceive consciously. In the end, for Nietzsche, woman is architecture, strategy, and master of the invisible, and understanding this is essential for any man who wishes to be emotionally free. It is not about accusation or hatred, it is about brutal clarity. She does not love in the way man imagines, and this realization is the key to breaking cycles of dependence and suffering. Recognizing woman as the architect of power means understanding love not as surrender, but as a game. And only those who understand the board can walk through it without getting lost. Nietzsche challenges us to look beyond the soft masks and perceive the truth. Real power is not in who desires, but in who knows how to lead the desire of others. While woman silently architected her power, man often walked blindly through the emotional labyrinth that he himself helped build. Nietzsche observes that passionate surrender, the need to be desired and loved, turns man into a hostage of his own needs. He believes he's in control, that his gestures of protection, attention, and desire shape the relationship, when in reality, every step has already been foreseen, anticipated, and led by a logic he does not see. This emotional blindness is not moral weakness, but the consequence of the inability to understand that love can be facade and affection a silent trap. Nietzsche describes this dynamic as an invisible prison, built with subtle gestures and calculated silences. The absence that hurts, the promise that is never fulfilled, the gaze that attracts but does not fix. All this is emotional architecture, and man, surrendered to the need for validation, becomes a slave without realizing it. He bows to signs, begs for attention, seeks approval, and the more he surrenders, the more predictable and manipulable he becomes. Desire, instead of liberating, imprisons him. He does not realize that his own love, his surrender, is the chain that keeps him captive. The philosopher also emphasizes that male surrender is not only emotional but psychological. Every attempt to please or conquer is paradoxically an act of submission. Man believes he's offering something valuable, affection, devotion, presence, but Nietzsche warns us. While he seeks to be loved, he gives away his strength and freedom. Woman, sensitive to power and neediness, senses the emotional hunger and knows how to exploit it. Thus man becomes a hostage to his own emotional dependence, without realizing that the key to the prison has always been in his hands. Nietzsche does not treat this as condemnation. He sees it as an opportunity for self-transformation and liberation. The first step is to understand that love is not synonymous with blind surrender. Man must recognize the emotional game for what it is, a dynamic of power, desire, and control that exists independently of guilt or malice on the part of any participant. Only by understanding this reality can he begin to rebuild his emotional autonomy, becoming aware of his vulnerability and at the same time of his unexplored strength. Liberation, according to Nietzsche, requires a symbolic and brutal gesture, to kill the beggar of affection within oneself. The man who begs, who depends, who incessantly seeks external validation, needs to abandon this hunger that corrodes him. In doing so, It is not about denying desire or love, but about taking control over them, transforming the energy of neediness into personal power. This is the path to no longer being a prisoner of illusions and emotional manipulations, and to becoming someone whose presence is independent of external approval or attention. Nietzsche then presents the model of the Bermensch, the Superman, not as a conqueror of women, but as someone who has conquered himself. He does not beg. He does not seek to be chosen. He does not plead for affection. His strength lies in integrity and emotional self-sufficiency. By becoming complete on his own, man ceases to be predictable and consequently becomes irresistible. His presence is not the result of manipulation or seduction, but of the intensity of his own life and purpose. And it is precisely this strength that attracts and at the same time destabilizes those who are used to controlling with emotional strategies. In this state, man no longer lives according to love or the desire of others. He lives according to his mission and his own existence. Love, when it arises, does not imprison him nor define him, but presents itself as a complement or consequence of his fullness. Nietzsche emphasizes that the true power of man lies in the absence of need, in the ability to simply be without begging for attention or approval. Woman, when faced with this unshakable presence, finds herself outside the usual control, and the silent game of power is interrupted. Now, what commands is no longer emotional manipulation, but autonomy. Finally, Nietzsche leaves us with a challenge. Man must decide between continuing to be trapped by emotional hunger or transforming himself into unshakable strength. Emotional freedom is not found in rejecting the feminine, but in understanding one's own strength and independence. By freeing himself from the cycle of submission and neediness, man ceases to be a prisoner of love and becomes the center of his own life. At this point, he not only survives the emotional game but transcends it, becoming an irresistible and enigmatic presence, someone who does not beg, does not bow, and above all cannot be dominated. The first step to applying Nietzsche's philosophy in practical life is to recognize your own emotional vulnerability. Many men live oblivious to the forces that dominate them: fear of being alone, need for approval, desire to be loved. Before seeking any external transformation, it is necessary to face the inner mirror and admit, I am hungry for affection, dependent on validation, a prisoner of my own desire. This initial awareness is brutal but necessary. Nietzsche believed that liberation only begins when one understands the extent of one's own emotional slavery, because only then can one break the invisible chains that hold the soul. Next, it is essential to kill the internal beggar who pleads for love. This does not mean denying feelings, but taking control over them. Every gesture of neediness, every act of emotional submission must be transformed into energy of autonomy. Nietzsche saw this practice as an exercise in self-sufficiency. By ceasing to beg for attention or approval, man begins to exist for himself and not as a reflection of the desire of others. It is the moment when inner strength replaces emotional hunger, and man begins to command himself before trying to understand the other. The third step is to cultivate unshakable presence. Instead of chasing, pleasing, or begging, man must focus on his own life, purpose, and development. Nietzsche believed that presence charged with authenticity and intensity is more magnetic than any attempt at seduction. When a man remains centered, firm, and self-contained, he creates an enigma that cannot be controlled. This is the practice of silent power. The world, and especially the feminine, perceives independence as an irresistible force. Another crucial point is learning to transform desire into power. Nietzsche teaches that sexual impulse, intense affection or passion should not dominate man, but serve as fuel for growth, creativity, and action. The man who can channel his desires toward his own mission ceases to be a prisoner of what he feels. becoming sovereign of his own life. This transmutation requires discipline and continuous reflection, but it is the path to avoid being manipulated by the emotional game of others, remaining master of his energy and choices. Nietzsche also emphasizes the importance of not reacting impulsively to the emotional signals of others. Every absence, every look or calculated gesture that could disturb man must be faced with serenity and analysis. Instead of responding to provocation, he learns to maintain emotional balance, avoiding falling into the traps of those who seek to control. This practice of observation and self-control transforms man into a conscious participant in the game, and not a victim of the silent manipulation that often imprisons him. The practice of emotional self-sufficiency is accompanied by the construction of clear and firm purposes. Nietzsche saw a personal mission as the most attractive and unshakable force a man can possess. By focusing on goals, growth, and excellence, he not only fills his own life with meaning but also becomes irresistible. Love and affection cease to be a need and become a complement. This stance is not arrogance. It is the manifestation of someone who is enough for himself and does not depend on external validation. Another practical application is learning the power of absence and silence. Nietzsche emphasizes that lack of need is more provocative and transformative than any demonstration of desire. It is not about conscious manipulation, but a natural consequence of being complete in oneself. A man who does not beg, who does not explain himself, who does not bow, disrupts the traditional emotional game, and his strength lies precisely in the inability of others to shape or control him. His active absence creates fascination and respect effortlessly. Finally, Nietzsche teaches us that true emotional freedom is only achieved with consistency and courage. The daily practice of self-sufficiency, unshakable presence, mastery of desire, and focus on purposes transforms man into someone who cannot be manipulated, dominated, or diminished by external expectations. He ceases to be a prisoner of neediness, of the need to be loved or approved by others. In this state, man becomes a living enigma, irresistible and above all free, reflecting Nietzsche's ideal of overcoming and sovereignty over oneself. Throughout this journey, Nietzsche showed us that love and desire can be silent traps, shaped by subtle forces that few dare to perceive. Woman, in the philosopher's view, is the architect of this power, and the man who allows himself to be guided by neediness and dependence becomes a prisoner of his own surrender. But it is not about accusation or judgment. It is about lucidity. Nietzsche did not want to create cold or insensitive men, but whole men, conscious and self-sufficient, capable of transcending the emotional dynamic that so many are trapped in for endless cycles. The first step, as we have seen, is to recognize and face one's own vulnerability. Only when we admit that we depend on external validation can we begin to transform that need into strength. Every gesture of uncontrolled surrender, every plea for affection, every anxiety for another's love is an opportunity to awaken. Nietzsche teaches us that true freedom does not come from control over others, but from mastery over oneself. The ability to exist whole even in the absence of approval. Learning to be unshakable presence, transform desire into power, maintain emotional balance, and focus on personal purposes is not a simple task, but it is the path to break the cycle of submission and emotional manipulation. The man who achieves this not only frees himself, but also transforms his relationship with the world. He becomes irresistible, not because he seduces, but because he simply is. His life pulses with intensity and authenticity, and the attraction he awakens is natural, silent, and powerful. Nietzsche reminds us that true love, when it arises, neither imprisons nor defines, but complements. It is not a facade nor a trap, but a consequence of a man who is enough for himself, who is whole, who does not beg. The Nietzschean Superman is not defined by conquest, but by sovereignty over himself. And it is precisely this sovereignty that transforms any relationship, making it more intense, true, and balanced. Because the man who masters himself does not depend, does not fear, does not beg, does not lose himself. Daily practice of this philosophy requires discipline, courage, and consistency. Every choice not to yield to neediness, not to beg for attention or love, to maintain purpose and focus, is a step toward emotional freedom. Nietzsche teaches that man must become the center of his own life, the reference of his own existence, and not a satellite orbiting around the desire of others. Only then does he become immune to manipulation, irresistible in essence, and complete in his inner strength. The man who transforms himself according to these principles ceases to be predictable and vulnerable. He does not need praise, approval, sex, or empty promises to feel whole. His presence and intensity speak for themselves. Nietzsche shows that true power lies in the absence of need, in the ability to be complete and fascinating without depending on anyone. This man does not seek to control. He simply exists, and this existence is in itself absolute mastery. The final challenge Nietzsche leaves is clear and forceful. Will you continue to be a prisoner of emotional hunger, or will you become sovereign of yourself? The path is not to deny desire nor reject the feminine. It is to transcend dependence. Take control of your emotions and build a life centered on purpose, strength, and authenticity. The man who follows this philosophy not only survives the emotional game but transcends it, becoming an indelible, enigmatic, and irresistible presence. Therefore, listen carefully. Transformation does not depend on the other, nor on the love one expects to receive. It begins within you at the moment you stop begging, stop pleading for affection, stop waiting for approval, and decide to become complete on your own. Nietzsche taught us that the man who is enough for himself is free, fascinating, and powerful. And it is this freedom that, in the end, not only attracts, but completely redefines the dynamic between the masculine and the feminine, creating more authentic, balanced, and intense relationships. True power is not in conquering someone, it is in conquering oneself. Now you understand that true power is not in conquering someone, but in conquering yourself. The man who stops begging, stops pleading for attention, and stops depending on the approval of others becomes impenetrable, irresistible, and complete. Nietzsche shows us that emotional sovereignty is not about dominating others, but about mastering one's own life. And it is at this point that freedom arises that no one can take away. The final lesson is clear. Stop expecting love or external approval to fill your gaps. Become whole, cultivate your presence, strengthen your purpose, and transform desire into power. When you become self-sufficient, everything changes. Respect, admiration, and even desire arise naturally, because what fascinates is not who begs, but who simply is. If you felt the impact of these words and want to continue this journey of self-mastery and inner discovery, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell. Here you will find more videos that will challenge your mind, strengthen your presence, and transform your way of living. Do not miss the chance to become the most powerful version of yourself. Click subscribe and join us on this journey. These two videos in front of you are not here by chance. And what if everything you believe about yourself is only a reflection of someone else's gaze? Click now on one of the videos beside you and start breaking this mirror. You will have to risk the click, so which one will you choose?